I am never afraid to reach out and just say, you know what? I don't understand what's going on here with the color space. Why is this happening? What can we do here to solve this? So it's about getting in front of something if there's an issue. It's about being prepared. And also, the old saying goes, you only have one time to make a first good impression, right? And if you blow that, then you lose it. You lose the room. And that is not a good place to be.
Welcome to Color and Coffee, a podcast that's focused on the craft of color and the artist behind it. I'm your host, Jason Bodak, and each episode we'll sit down with some of the most talented artists in the industry and have a casual chat from one artist to another. We'll share their stories, their insights, their tips, and maybe even a little gear talk. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just getting started, join us for some great color discussion. Sit back, relax. You're listening to Color and Coffee. Hi, I'm Jason Bodak, and welcome to another exciting episode of Color and Coffee. Before we dive in, I want to give a huge thank you to our sponsors, FSI, Demystify Color, and Pixel Tools. Thank you for supporting the show. Today's guest is Lynette Duensing, who is not only an amazing colorist, but a fantastic human being and friend. Lynette is the senior colorist at Instinctual in Los Angeles, where she works closely with creative teams deep in the filmmaking process to craft trailers that capture the final film's look and feel, often before that look is even locked in. She's also a CSI fellow and a board member of the Colorist Society Hollywood. Also, she is an all-around amazing collaborator in the world of finishing in color. Welcome to the show, Lynette.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. This is just great. I love it.
Before we jump into our conversation, I think it's worth mentioning that you've worked on some amazing films, some of them being the upcoming Anaconda, Anyone But You, Kraven the Hunter, The Woman King, and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So you have really an amazing resume. I am so excited to have you on the show today, and I think we have a really entertaining chat today. We're mainly going to be focusing on Anaconda, but before that, I wanted to dive in on what it's like to work on trailers before the film's final look and feel is locked in. Can you talk about a little bit what that process is like?
Right. So many times I am tasked with grading material that has not gone to the final DI, and I'm given the color workflow from the original DI house that will be working on it going forward. So I'm able to make a node tree where I have the CDLs from the set, as well as the show LUT and understanding the color workflow. And then I'm able to work with the creative executives at Sony, as well as hopefully, if they're available, the filmmakers. So yeah, like in the case of Spider-Verse, the first Spider-Verse, we started working on that about a year and a half before it went to DI with Natasha, of course, who does beautiful DI work on the Sony animation projects. So I'm able to sit with those filmmakers, those animators in that case, having them sit in the room and help me work through what their creative vision for the project's going to be. Now, in the case of Spider-Verse, these are ACES files that come from Sony Pictures Animation. That makes it really intuitive and really easy to get there from the beginning because you're working in the ACES workflow that they're working with those animators in their studio. And when they come into the room, they're seeing, hopefully, and usually, what it is they're used to looking at. And what's nice for me at that point is that I get to help them with the development of what their final animation is going to be. They'll look at things and say, oh, the lighting or the shading or this or the that needs to change. Or maybe even they're just still in animatic form, which happens when I have to do something that's going to go to Comic-Con. The latest Spider-Verse that will be coming out next year, or maybe almost in 2 years, I worked on that for Comic-Con, and some of that stuff was still in very, very rough animation stage at that point. So a number of different things get to happen. If I'm working on an ACES project like that for animation, then this is a very straightforward process because those files are going to look very much like what they're supposed to look like without a lot of intervention from me. In the the case of doing Anaconda or doing, let's say, The Woman King
Hmm.
or whatever, I have to start, and some cases before I've even spoken to the DP, to get those shots and to get that timeline into a shape that is viewable. Obviously it looks great, but that I'm going to at least get it into a place where people can see it, and then to take their notes and to make the final grade. So in the case of The Woman King, I was able to work with the director of photography. And in the case of Anaconda, I worked with the visual effects team. And that was how we got to the color that we ended up with.
That sounds incredibly challenging, especially with today's world of hyper analyzing trailers by frame. You are essentially grading blind, if I can use that term, in the sense that you are having to start working on this project, sometimes with assistance from the creative team, and sometimes you said without it, in the case of The Woman King, until you are able to get this team either because they're working on another film or because they're still currently working on this film. And how do you approach that? What is your mindset when you're starting to work like that, knowing that these are sometimes more analyzed than the film, I feel, in today's society?
Well, you bring up a really good point, and it's something that is absolutely taken into consideration. We have a lot of awareness that people are looking at these things frame by frame. And like in the case of finishing Venom, I didn't do the original color on that, but I end up doing the delivery color and doing visual effects color. And we are very, very cognizant of the fact that people are looking at this frame by frame. And it's challenging because, as you know, as a colorist, we look at things flowing. We look at how they're going to work one shot next to another. And that's another point about doing trailers. You're using shots that would never appear together in the film, and you need to make them look like a cohesive storytelling. So this is a challenge, and this is something that we take into consideration every frame. And we do try and make sure that it flows together. But, if we're looking at a visual effects shot, we're absolutely analyzing everything because somebody online is going to have something to say about it. As you know, everyone's got an opinion.
Social media is very, very difficult, and you bring up an incredible point in the fact that color is based off consistency and how it looks with the shots surrounding it, and we are essentially building a new creative project by putting shots that are not supposed to be next to each other to form this trailer. And it still has to feel consistent and feel like it was supposed to be together, even though you might have a shot from the first third of the film next to a shot with the last third of the film. And it might be completely narratively different, and there may be a different story going on there, but it has to feel like it was supposed to be together the whole time.
Well, that's right. And there's a little bit of a push and pull between the creatives, who are the creative executives in the marketing department, and the filmmakers, because the filmmakers have in their mind what their intention was in the narrative that they've created. But when you see shots that have been taken by a creative editorial vendor and put next to one another, they're not always going to work together. And so it's kind of something about trying to compromise to make sure that we have the creative intent of the filmmaker and don't deviate too much from it, but try and make them work together. That's kind of the thing about being an experienced colorist, is understanding how to match shots, how to make something that's visually appealing and exciting, and putting those things together and weighing them one to the other, just trying to keep it so that it all looks beautiful together and keep everybody happy, which is one of the hard things about our job, but why we do it.
Yeah, running the room is really difficult. I think, as I've worked in trailers and marketing before, I think that's one of the most difficult parts of the job, is trying to communicate to the creative team that grading for marketing is a little bit different in the fact that you do need to shift the color a tiny bit. You can't just use the straight grade from the film, especially if you have two shots that are jarring against each other. What is your approach to that? Because I have certainly been caught in those situations where I have the creative team saying it's graded, or this is the way we wanted it to look and it looks perfect the way it is. I shot it exactly like that, and this is the grade that we like. When you have two shots that are literally slamming their head up against each other. And you, as a professional that works in trailers, know with your experience that these are jarring together, and the editorial for this trailer specifically is not working. The cut's working, but the color's not working. How would you explain to the creative in the most professional, nice way that there needs to be a slight shift while maintaining the creative intent?
Right. Well, that's therein lies, as I've said in so many times in so many venues, that is the skill that we bring to the table. And that's an experienced colorist. It's a 50-50 thing between the creative and managing the people in the room. And of course, I'm always very kind and never say, "What are you thinking?" I never do that. First of all, you have to have also people in the room who are helping you in this way in discussing this. So it's usually the creative executives at the studio who understand that they need to make it match. Also, that they need to have it be possibly more hyper realistic than the original film intent, because there's so many filmmakers out there and they do beautiful, lovely work and they're very nuanced. But when you're making a trailer where every shot is 1 second long and has to have an impact, then you need to look at that differently. So I depend in some way to say, this is what I think needs to happen here. And I understand the beauty and what you've built into this, but I can't see their face, or I can't see what they're doing, or whatever. And usually it's the creative executive from the studio who will back me up and say, this is really what we need. Or I am backing up that creative executive in that discussion with a filmmaker to say, I think that the impact of the shot would be better served if we were to brighten this shot or to darken this shot or whatever. And it's just really all about communicating, and it's all about being diplomatic. Hopefully you have somebody there that can back you up. But in the end, it's really what they want, and it's not what I want. We all, as colorists, have to keep that in mind, because sometimes we can be in a room and just disagree or just think that something is a bad idea. But in the end, it's not what we think. We are there to execute a vision, and that's it.
Yeah, you hit on some really interesting points, but I think most what I took away from that is there needs to be a certain degree of trust between you and the creatives, between you and the executives, between the executives and the creative, and all around, because you are all making compromises. And these compromises need to be agreeable to absolutely everybody. They say like a negotiation is a good negotiation if everybody walks away unhappy. And everybody needs to make a little bit of a compromise to make this work. And it's funny because people want to walk away feeling like they got the best end of the deal. And I feel like that is what works in the grading suite. It's like, I got away with murder in there. And everybody feels that way. It's like, great, perfect. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that in the end, once again, it's not about winning. It's just really about making sure that you have the trust of the people that you're talking to. They have confidence that you can make their dream happen. You know, you're talking about somebody's baby here.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that somebody has been working on for perhaps a few years. And so what you are doing is being a steward of that work that they've worked so hard on. So you're not going to go and die on a sword because you think that something needs to be a certain way. It needs to be the way they want it. And then you go and with the creative executive who might think that that filmmaker's decision needs to be tweaked a little bit. And then we just are very, very conscious to be respectful of that. But you also touched on something that is a challenge for me. And that is that a filmmaker has a colorist who's going to be doing their DI.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably somebody who they're very familiar with or a friend. And now this particular part of the process has been put in the hands of somebody else. And this is a very challenging thing for me, and a situation that is uncomfortable for me sometimes, because I want to do the best job for them possible. And I believe I can do that. But you have to convince somebody that you can do that. especially if they don't know you. And this project has been put in my hands by the studio, right? It takes a little bit of a dance to start off, is getting to know that person and having them have the confidence in you that you can do what it is that they need done with their baby, the thing that they've been living with for the last number of years.
I so understand what you're talking about, and uncomfortable is the perfect word for it. And because usually it's not always the case, but a lot of the times they have selected their final colorist and they've may have already started working with them, especially if they have a show LUT selected. And it's this dance, like you said, of convincing them that I am not trying to change that. I am trying to steward this over to them in the best way possible. I am the limo driver to bring them the final film in the best way possible. And we are just doing the trailer. I want to take that look that you guys have worked on and move it over as best as I can, understand the DNA of it with the tools that you guys have developed, the show look, the CDLs, whatever you guys have developed so far, and sort of guide it over to the final DI suite in the most stewardly way possible. I keep using that word, but basically you're trying to sort of ambulance it over to the final resting place so the final colorist can continue working on this with their tools. And I think that's a really difficult process sometimes. I'd love to hear some of the ways that you approach that and some of the challenges that you've experienced, because I think there's a lot of pushback in the sense of protecting your artistic vision. We already have what we want and we don't need you. We already have our look. We already have our colors. And what are you doing with our project kind of feeling?
Of course, I don't have control over any of that. I am tasked with doing something and delivering something in a very, very expedited manner. You know, I'm doing a lot of these things because this thing is going to be dropped next week. Right? It's not going to be able to get in with the final colorist. If anyone were to go to my website, LynetteDuensing.com, you will see the trailers that I've done. And the only trailers that I post on my website are ones that I have done the final color on before it's gone to the DI. I touch every trailer that is released by Sony. I do the final view of the DCPs and a number of different films that the DI colorist has done the trailer on. I am going to be the person who will eventually oversee its delivery. We have big name colorists working on some of the trailers that we deliver. And I am extremely careful to make sure that everyone knows that I am not taking any credit for the work that they have done. The tough thing for me, in a sense, is that I bring a great amount of experience to doing the grade on a number of different titles, trailers, but I will never, ever take credit for somebody else's work, even though I've had a really large part in what that ends up being delivered. So the only thing that you'll ever see of mine on my portfolio is something that I've worked with the filmmaker from the very beginning before it goes to the DI.
Well, that's incredibly humble of you, and I think more colors should take that mindset into account. Let's jump into one of those trailers. Let's talk about Anaconda, a film that I honestly can't wait to hit theaters. So you've told me that this has been a very interesting trailer, and I don't doubt that because there's a ton of visual effect shots in there, and I'm sure they're not all finished. Can you tell me a little bit about this trailer and what the experience has been, not only getting it out there, but working with the filmmakers?
Instinctual, where I work, is also a visual effects company, and I also oversee visual effects reviews. So I have filmmakers in the room with me or in our sister theater over on the Sony lot. I have people in the room where I do visual effects reviews for them. So I'll have a timeline of all the shots in Resolve, and I put a data burn in on them, and we look at visual effects versions together, and then they make decisions as to what they're going to do going forward on a number of different films, even if it has nothing to do with Sony. We do it for Amblin and a number of other companies, Netflix. But anyway, in the case of Anaconda, I started off with them doing visual effects reviews for visual effects executives at the studio. So I do a live 444 stream, 2K stream, to our sister theater at Thalberg. And so they sit there and they look at the visual effects. I'm able to grade them live so that they can see what those effects are going to look like. And then they make changes at that point. The color changes that I make may inform the notes they're going to give, like in this case to ILM, about what it is that something needs to be. So this Anaconda started off as a visual effects review and then an accelerated streaming date. So I ended up doing the color on the full trailer before it goes to DI. So yeah, it was great. It's for anybody in the audience who knows or doesn't know, most shots come in as linear EXRs. I'm given the color workflow. In this case, it was ACEs to area wide gamut 4, and then to build that into my node tree. Usually I put my lin to log in the pre-clip. I don't put it on the clip node tree. I put that in a pre-clip, and then I set up a parallel node tree for putting all my mats. So in the case of Anaconda, these were embedded mats, which hopefully if we're doing a visual effects heavy job, the visual effects vendor has given us a number of mats so that when we grade, we're able to do it. So I set up a parallel node tree for each of my mats that I bring in. I do that because in the case of something where I don't have a mat for everything, then I use the mats I have and I put power windows on, and I don't want to be in a serial situation where I've baked a color into a node and then not be able to undo it in a different part of the mat, which is in the case of Anaconda, what I ended up having to do because the body of the snake, which there was only one mat for, they wanted to have a number of different grades for the head and for the body and for the eyes and all of that. So, well, actually, the eyes had its own mat, but because I'm using one mat and making several mats from it, then I use it in parallel and then put the show LUT after that.
Love
I don't
it.
know whether that answered. Does that answer the question? I don't
I mean,
know.
I love some of the technical details. A lot of people don't work with such a high-end VFX vendor and get sort of a preview of the workflow. One of the questions that I have is when you're working with temp VFX shots or work in progress VFX shots, are you given all of the mats that you think you would expect with the finals, or do you have to request some additional mats?
There are some times, now in the case of Anaconda, we didn't have to request additional mats.
Mhm.
They had everything that we needed to use. But there are cases in other films where we've had to ask. The other thing that's really nice about having a visual effects team upstairs is that I just call and say, Jesse, help me out here. Can you make a mat for A, B, C, and D? Now, of course, AI is going to change a lot of that going forward. Resolve 20 certainly has helped with doing backgrounds and things like that. But in regard to doing a visual effects heavy film where you've got multiple pieces that need to have special attention, then we need to use those embedded mats and or do the best we can to modify them.
I love that idea of basically making it yourself where you can take the full mat of the snake and splitting it up. I think that's a brilliant idea, and combining that potentially with the built-in Resolve AI tools. I think that's a really smart way, especially under the timetable you're working on. You may have to get this out to DCP or to streaming ASAP, so you may not have time to wait for another mat or to even send it upstairs for a VFX artist to work on that. So I think that's a very smart, efficient way of working.
Well, that's right. And the thing is for us, they at Sony have started to depend on me to say as a problem solver. And really what it is that we're paid to do is just to be that person that can do this stuff quickly. Now, if there's something that I simply cannot do, I look at it and just go, I can't do this, or I'm going to have to roto this, and this is going to take a lot of time. That's the other part of what it is that we do, right? Is that you understand what it is you're good at and the time constraint to do it. I am not a visual effects artist. There are certain things that I can do, but I will absolutely call upstairs and just say, can you take a look at this really quick? And usually they can get it done pretty quickly. And we work in a really collaborative workflow. So I have the conform artist in the theater with me, whose desk is next to me, Doug Ludwig, who's one of the partners at Instinctual, and he will prep that shot that I'm having trouble with. It goes into a shared library for Flame and is treated in the middle of the session. And I just say to the client, you know what, we're going to send this upstairs. Let's go on to another shot. And by the time we're done with the other stuff, the shot's ready.
I come back.
And it comes back to me. So that's a great way to work, I can tell you.
That was one of the things moving around from lower budget indie films into larger projects that really was maybe not shocking to me, but was like a mind blowing expansion to me, was the fact that you have conform artists working in the same room, the workflow that you just mentioned, and that you can essentially drop in VFX shots and then cycle back either the next day or literally in the same session like you just described, move on to the next shot, because it really is about iterating as quickly as possible. And I mean, the last film I was working on had hundreds and hundreds of VFX shots, and we had new deliveries every single day, and it was just about replacing that last one with the newest version. Do we have the newest version? So that you make sure the colorist is working on the latest version of that shot. So it's amazing that you guys are also doing that in the trailer as well. It's almost like it's a must-have at this point if you're going to be working with executives at that level.
Right. And well, for us too, we have a great trailer producer, Jeff Brown, and he is keeping track of making sure that we have all the right versions of things, or the right version is used, because you might have the latest version 20 of a shot, and then they decide they want to use version 15 again. And that happens all the time. There's a big housekeeping part of that's going on here. And again, if I can say, it's about collaboration. I am not an editor. I will never pretend to care about Resolve editing. I'm sorry to say that. But I have people that I work with that are so fabulous and so on it. I don't have to worry about that. And I don't have to worry about making sure all my versions are correct. I mean, obviously we're talking and I'm like, okay, this is what I've got in here. I'm doing a pickup shot of this. I do sometimes pick up layers where I'm getting a whole bunch of new shots that are coming in, and we make sure that they're correct. But the workflow that I'm in, the conform artist is everything, and keeping track of everything.
I think that's a really interesting point that you just made. And it's not the sexy part of color. It's not the part that's advertised on the marketing for Resolve's next version. But I think proper organization and keeping your project prepped and organized and really like having a really locked down workflow. And when I say locked down, I mean one that works for you and your team is the most important part of having a well-oiled machine in terms of color and finishing. And I do not think it's talked about enough, because when it works, nobody talks about it. It's just, it goes like a car. You can just keep it going for 200,000 miles, put oil in there, check it every once in a while, and it just works. But when it doesn't work, clients leave, they scream, they want to fire people. It's the thing that needs to be worked on the most. And I love that you are so focused on that. You prep your projects. You said you come in early. It is really not discussed enough. And I would love, like, if for somebody that is looking and wants to do this at home, they may not have the staff or work on the level of projects. What are a couple of tips that you would recommend for people that are working on their own projects in Resolve that want to be more organized and prep projects?
And speaking to that and how it works for us is we worked really hard on this, and especially during COVID when we had time to work on it, is to streamline all of this stuff. We have a collaborative workflow that starts the vendor for creative editorial sends to Flame, and all this stuff is conformed in Flame, and then they give us a clip pool and an EDL, and then I make a timeline from that. I am not an editor, but it's very easy for me to go and bring in a clip pool and an EDL and to check it and all that against an offline or a cut ref and all of that. My feeling is for anybody who's doing this at home or doing this as an independent, let's put it that way, is just about, and I guess I don't really need to say this, I'm sure they probably already know this, and that is preparation, doing things in advance, and also putting the cut ref in as an offline and making sure absolutely 100% that all your time warps are correct, that all of your resizes are correct, all of that stuff, because people see this and they've been looking at it for a while. Maybe you just saw it, maybe it just came into your box, but they know what it's supposed to look like. And if you haven't matched this up against their cut ref or their offline reference to make sure that everything that you're doing your XML, all of these things have lined you up correctly, then you're standing there embarrassed or scrambling. I guess that's all I can say, because I'll be really honest, I don't have the experience as an independent to say exactly what I would do to start prepping a job, because I have a backup team that helps with all of that for me. But my only thing is that I never walk into a room with people unless I have spent a great deal of time making sure that what I have. And the other part is, do you have the right color management applied to this thing? Your offline is probably not a bad place to start in regard to knowing what the client is used to seeing before they walk into the room. And before you start changing anything, is just to make sure that your color workflow is buttoned up and your editorial is buttoned up.
I can say ashamed or not ashamed, whichever one you want to approach, to admit that I've absolutely destroyed my trust with a client in previous years by doing something stupid and allowing the offline to shift and resolve and have the wrong time warp or the wrong way of time warping or the wrong optical flow type. And they see that and they go, that is not what I cut. And immediately after that, you lose trust for the entire session. And instead of having this collaborative relationship, you end up having this fighting feeling of, do I really trust them? Am I sure I can trust them? Should I go with my gut or should I trust them? And it's just so much harder to work with if you didn't do what you said and really just take that extra time up front to make sure that that is buttoned up.
Right. Well, and if there are problems, that's the other part of doing what we do, and that's communication. And if there's something that is not lining up and you don't understand why it's not lining up, then a call to the creative editorial or a call to a producer or a get in front of it kind of attitude about if something does not look right. I am never afraid to reach out and just say, you know what, I don't understand what's going on here with the color space. I've been given a shot and this does not look correct. And even though I'm working in the workflow that you've designed, why is this happening? What can we do here to solve this? So it's about getting in front of something if there's an issue. It's about being prepared. And also, as you pointed out, in the trust issue with perhaps somebody new, as the old saying goes, you only have one time to make a first good impression, right? And if you blow that, then you lose it. You lose the room. And that is not a good place to be.
No, it's really, really difficult, and it makes for a very unpleasant session until you can earn that back, if you can earn that back. And with some people, you never will. I am curious because sometimes, especially I would imagine during trailers, you might have some difficulty with that color management. Maybe you haven't gotten the information on the level that you're working at. I imagine it's much more straightforward, but what happens if you're not getting the information that you need to set up your color management properly? How would you approach that?
Well, that's a good question because that has certainly happened to me. And I just really, really push. And Jeff, who is our producer, I don't have to be the bad guy. He calls and he gets as much information as he can get for me. If I don't get it, then I have to figure it out myself. Maybe I put something into an ACES workflow and just kind of bring everything in to where I think that I can manage all of the shots together. One of the things is where I work in trailers is that I get a lot of different kinds of media. So the camera from set may be Ari or Sony Venice or something like that, but I'm also doing graphics. So the graphics come in as 709 or sRGB, or we might be getting stock footage from Getty or something like that. And all of these things need to be put together and have the right color transforms applied to them. Or working in ACES, the right input transforms to put them into the working color space. And sometimes we don't know what they are. And that can happen. So there's just a lot of trial and error. And again, I sit and I don't care how long it takes. I will go through every single input transform I can think of to make something look correct or what I think it's supposed to be if I'm not given all the information. And again, I use the offline from creative editorial as a guide from time to time. First of all, it's what the client is used to seeing. And it's quite possible the creative editorial vendor has been given the color management that I have not been given. So they might have the show lot. They might know through conversation what the camera is if I don't know. And so I can start there and doing my little bit of investigation to figure it out.
I mean, that's a great piece of advice, is simply sort of try and get the best information you can from the creatives. And if not, you have to brute force it and make sure you take that time to give yourself the time and the space to do that appropriately, and don't rush it, especially not in front of the client, because you're not going to do your best work there. You'll feel nervous, you'll feel jittery, and you don't want them to see the wrong time, the wrong input transform 10 times because they don't understand what you're doing.
You lose the room when you do that. When you don't have confidence in what it is to look at, you lose the room. And the other part about it is, and especially doing what I do, is that these people barely have time to be in the room with you as it is. They can't be watching you figure it out.
I have an interesting question, and it's that I assume that the visual effects shots, they're coming from some of the top vendors in the world, but they're not finished. And I am intrigued of how you approach visual effects shots that are certainly not finished, and how you can, I'll say, beautify them, make them as best as possible. Because like we were talking about earlier, some of these trailers are nitpicked and frame picked at in a way that, one, they're not supposed to, and two, they're compared to the final Blu-ray and home releases in a way that they're also not supposed to. How do you approach that? And how do you, when they say like, oh, this doesn't look that great, or this is not final, what do you do in the suite with what you're given?
Right. Well, you do the best that you can, and it's also up to them as they look at it to say whether it's acceptable or not. And in the case of other films, and I don't want to be specific because it's not up to me to say anything in regard to the work of a visual effects vendor who's worked really hard on something, but a lot of times I might be softening the edge of a matte. Sometimes I might be even almost softening an image if something looks like the background is not matching the foreground, which happens. And so I just very, very politely say, you know what I think we could do here? I think we could go and perhaps try and create a little bit more depth of field here. Whereas, because a lot of times with a green screen or a blue screen, you have a foreground image that where you've got everything looks flat. It's like something that looks like it's just been pasted right up against a back image or a background image. That's because, like you say, it's still a work in progress. So that's the kind of thing that I help out with. And it's generally about trying to add a depth of field or perhaps a softness or a sharpness to something, whether it's the matte or the key or whether it's the image itself. But ultimately, when everybody's looking at it, they may have to wait for it to come back for a new version. And that does happen. Sometimes I'm given something and the matte doesn't fit. And so I have no problem just going, I think we can do better here. We're going to need to ask for a redeliver on something. And I can show them what that is. And I very rarely get pushback. It's just they'll have to do what they have to do. The other thing that we haven't talked about either, when you're talking about trailers and about what the DI of the Blu-ray is, that we do shots that don't make the movie.
Oh my,
And
yes, of
so,
course. Tell me.
so we're working on shots, and we have to go and back to the editorial and have them pull shots for us. The studio will do pulls of shots for the trailer, and sometimes they have to go back to the editor and have them pull shots that never make the final film. And that happens with the visual effects. You're like, okay, we're doing a visual effects shot on something that's never going to be seen in the actual feature.
I mean, I can understand that. It's very unfortunate. And one of the things that I think that you hinted at, but I think is incredibly important that I just wanted to reiterate, is the fact that this is not the fault of the VFX vendor. This is simply part of the creative process, and we're pulling it as it's a work in progress. And this is more of a fault that we have so many trailers. We have teasers and teasers of teasers and teasers of teasers and teasers. And there is so much demand for content that they are simply pulling these films, and we want a hint of these films so early now that they are essentially saying, as we are cooking this film, I want a preview of it, that these visual effects shots are not necessarily ready to be viewed by audiences yet. They're ready to be viewed by the creatives in a screening room, but they're showing a preview to audiences. So when people are viewing these and saying, these visual effects look terrible, or this movie looks absolutely horrible, how do they show this? It's not supposed to look like that. This is the best they have right now, and these visual effects take months or years to develop. And so I think it's an incredibly interesting thing to hear about what you're able to do in the suite to basically sprinkle a little bit of sugar on top to make them as best as possible, because we are essentially breaking the filmmaking process to get these into the trailers and teasers as we do now. And so the fact that they don't look worse than they do is amazing to me.
Well, and I don't ever want to say that these look bad. Like in the case of Anaconda, I thought that they did a really nice job on it. And again, it's all about deadlines and needing to get things out quickly. But I think they did a really nice job on it, and the studio was happy with it. But at a certain point, they look at it and just say whether they think that the audience is going to be happy with the effect. And they're not going to, just because something's perhaps not a final, they're not going to let an effect go out that doesn't look good.
Yes,
And
I'll rephrase that.
yeah.
It's
So
I would say it's a work in, not bad, but a work in progress, and not as good as it will be in the final. And it's worth saying that they actually continue to replace these visual effect shots while movies are in theaters and up into the final home video release.
That's right. They do. And so obviously we're so used to having visual effects as being a part of filmmaking. And it's not because you're doing a superhero movie. It could be something very mundane about like replacing the curtains on a window.
Yeah.
Or in the case of Jack Black, a shirt on him in one of the things in Anaconda, which I won't say which one, but that's the thing. Visual effects are the things that are done not necessarily because it's a snake in the movie, but because it's something to make something very mundane look real in a shot that we take for granted as being real life. And it's every single movie that's out there. It's very rare that there's a film out there that doesn't have some kind of visual effect done to it. And in the case of trailers, we're doing it very quickly to make something believable, but it will never go out unless the studio thinks that it's good and believable, and it'll be improved some point, but hopefully the audience will have a positive reaction to it.
I mean, I certainly loved the trailer to Anaconda. It immediately sold me. And to be honest, I didn't pick up any other visual effects other than the snake. So that's a job well done to you and the entire creative team. Now, as we get to the end of our episode, where can those listening find more about you and more about Instinctual?
Yeah, so LynetteDuensing.com is where my portfolio is, and it tells a little bit about me. I've been doing this for a long time, and trailers is just kind of the latest bit of what I've been doing in the last 35 plus years of doing this job. That and Instinctual. I think it's instinctual.com. I think if you just Google Instinctual VFX, you'll find it. And yeah, that's the place to do it. And then also the Colorist Society. We have been working on a whole bunch of stuff, and you can find out a little bit more about me there as well. And we have some exciting news and things coming up. Stay tuned for that if you can.
Yes, we're really excited to share more about the Color Society. If you're a colorist, I highly recommend you check it out and consider joining. And thank you so much for joining us today, Lynette. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I know you have a hard out, so we'll let you get out, but really it's been so much fun chatting with you, learning more about the world of grading trailers and truly finding out how the films get made at this early point in finishing in color. All that info will be in the show notes for everyone that's interested. And for this episode in Color and Coffee, I'm Jason Bodak. We'll see you guys in the next one. Happy grading. And that's a wrap. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and your podcast app of choice. Search for @Color and Coffee or @Color and Coffee Podcast and join the conversation. If you're using Spotify or Apple Podcast, please leave a review. Huge thanks to FSI, Demystify Color, and Pixel Tools for sponsoring the show. Until the next episode,